Hey, I am so delighted and excited to introduce everyone, Mr. Jeff Thomas. We're asking Mr. Jeff to come aboard and introduce himself as he will.
Thank you, Val, for having me tonight. As Val said, my name is Jeff Thomas. I'm publisher and editor of Think 504, partner at WBOK Radio, have a media company. We do all kinds of things, and I'm just happy and thrilled to be here and see so many great faces and names that I know, and great community servants. And I just want to first of all thank everybody, all of the candidates here tonight who are offering themselves for service. It is truly commendable for each of you. So the way it's going to work is we have 5 questions that I'm going to ask you. I'm going to ask everybody the same 5 questions. You'll have how many 3 minutes to answer? Is that right, Valerie? Valerie's going to be.
Yes, you will have 2 minutes. You have 2 minutes
okay.
to answer. Then when you get to 1 minute, I will raise this little sign up, and Jeff will give you another minute, and he will have to turn into Mr. Sandman. So please don't let him turn into Mr. Sandman.
I have to shut you down. So I know everybody's time is important, and we're going to just get this forum started right now. The first question, and we're going to start with Ms. Clevenger. Well, before we do that, I want to announce the candidates. We have Morgan Clevenger, we have Alonzo Knox, we have Stephen Kennedy, we have we have also Tanaj Wallace, we have Sibil Fox Richardson. Everybody, all of the candidates were invited. I don't think I see Mr. Matthew Hill here tonight, but every other candidate was, all the other candidates, well, he was the only one who didn't show. So we're going to get started right now with the first question, which is, what issues do you want to see addressed in the upcoming regular session? And we're going to start with Ms. Clevenger. What issues do you want to see addressed in the upcoming regular session? Wait, I'm sorry, Ms. Clevenger, we need you to unmute yourself.
Good evening.
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Hear you great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Morgan Clevenger. I'm from New Orleans, for New Orleans. I'm running for District 93. I'm number 1 on the ballot. Thank you so much to Justice and Beyond for having this forum and inviting us. And I see so many of you that do such great work in the community. And the issues that we need to address in this upcoming session have to do with how we care for our people, because that loss and trauma that we continue to experience, especially as we try to continue to recover from such losses as a pandemic, as the hurricanes, you know, a lot of our recovery dollars are just not reaching where they need to reach. So that's a big one. The next one is I would really like to see DCFS, Department of Children and Family Services, take a deeper dive into how they are functioning and how they are funded, because we know from recent stories that we are seeing our children and our families succumbing to violence and trauma and loss of life. And the other is the insurance question, because we have not resolved that. And I know we have a question about that later. But also I've been a leader in property tax reform. And we had it on the ballot, and we need to bring it back, because even though property tax reform doesn't sound sexy, it's really important to how we function as a city.
Thank you, Ms. Clevenger. Same question for you, Mr. Knox. What do you want to see have happen in this upcoming regular session?
Thank you. And thank you to Justice and Beyond for hosting this event. I think it's very important that we have conversations around what we as a state need to do to improve the quality of life for everyone. And for me, I think the issue will be quality of life, or should be quality of life. One in particular, public safety, and how we look at the root causes that's creating the situation that we're in now, meaning this crisis of killing, this crisis of carjacking, and this crisis of poor quality of life. I think these issues are significant. They impact everyone at all levels. Doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter your income or your background. Quality of life issues affect everyone on an equal basis. So for me, the quality of life, particularly as it relates to public safety, should be addressed, and to drill down on the root causes such as mental health and addiction. We need to look at how we can fix those programs and fund them properly. In addition to that, I think this, without question, this insurance crisis that we're in. One thing that we need to look at is a holistic approach to how we're going to address this problem, not just a quick fix about attracting new companies here, but we need to look at it in a broader perspective. How do we impact everyday individuals who are losing their homes, literally, and who have to choose between whether or not they're going to pay for insurance, or they're going to pay their mortgage, or they're going to pay for food? That's not how this state should operate. That's not how our residents should live from day to day. So insurance is something that impacts a vast majority of our residents, and that's something we really need to look at from a holistic, comprehensive manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. Mr. Kennedy, same question for you. What do you want to see happen this upcoming regular session?
Thank you once again for Justice and Beyond. I was a longtime active member in Justice and Beyond for many, many years. So I know a lot of the faces on there. So thank you, Coalition, for the work that you all continue to do over the years. The key issue that I would like to focus on in the up and coming legislative session is small business legislation. Last year, Baton Rouge had a set-aside bill that was established in order to help minority women and small business being able to get procurement opportunity. And when you hear the word set aside, it's just not putting contracts on the side for a certain group of people. It's just allowing a competitive pool to be smaller, amongst those groups who have disadvantages. So that was one piece of legislation that I would like to focus on in the up and coming session. The next legislation I would like to focus on is creating a state low-income housing tax credit. We know that they got a national low-income housing tax credit, but we're in an affordable housing crisis across the state, especially in the city of New Orleans, with the rapid overrun of short-term rentals that's taken a lot of our rental housing stock off the market. So I would want to focus on a state low-income housing tax credit in order to produce more affordable housing and having smaller developer mom and pops being able to build those housing for our people.
1 minute.
The last thing that I would like to focus on is infrastructure. As we all know on this call that President Biden and his administration helped pass the Build Back Better plan. And that sent billions of dollars to the state of Louisiana to focus on critical infrastructure needs. And as we saw from the pandemic, a lot of schools were shut down, so kids had to go online and basically do Zoom calls. And a lot of kids actually fell behind because they didn't have access to internet. And some of those kids didn't have access to iPads or other electronic devices. Most kids were doing homework on their cell phones. And so I would like to focus on being able to bring critical resources to our local schools, but also bringing schools.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Your time's up. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Next, we'll go to Ms. Fox Richardson. Same question. What do you want to have happen this upcoming regular session? You need to unmute yourself, please.
There we go. That might help us, huh? It doesn't help if I'm talking and no one can hear me. Jeff, it's always a blessing to see your face. Love your work and appreciate it. Thank you, Justice and Beyond. The things that I am wanting to see addressed in this upcoming legislative session, first and foremost for me, would be criminal justice reform. As we know, we had non-unanimous jury decisions that we reversed as a statewide effort. And now we have 1,500 men and women who are still serving time in prison on illegal sentences. And because our Louisiana Supreme Court voted along racial lines to not make it retroactive, we have men and women that are hanging in limbo, waiting to see how it is that we are going to address their illegal sentences. The second and extremely important is women's rights. To see an advancement this legislative session as it pertains to women's rights. We've got to talk about the women, in particular in a city like New Orleans, where 75% of our households are headed by single women. We've got to make sure that equal pay for equal work is advanced. We've got to make sure that our reproductive rights and our reproductive health is advanced in this legislative session. And then for me, as always, being the child of an educator, education, where we have education, we have hope for our people. And I want to see more of those educational issues move forward this legislative session. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, same question for you, Ms. Tanaj Wallace. What do you want to have happen in this upcoming regular session?
Hi, thank you all for having me. I'm outside, so I hope everyone can hear me okay. So the first thing I want to see happen for this next regular session is addressing the wealth inequality that's affecting our families. You know, I think we need to address the eradication of these laws that are preventing us from setting our own minimum wage. It should be at least $15 an hour, but based on the cost of living in this city, it should be about $18. And I think if we can get people a respectable wage, then we'll start to see a lot of these other issues start to disappear. And something else I'd want to see addressed, but I'm not sure if it'll come up this session, is the short-term rental situation, which is affecting people from having affordable housing. I think it's actually stopping people that are hardworking and working in this city, in this district in particular. It's stopping them from having access to that safe and affordable housing so that they can get to work and actually continue to be residents of this city from within city limits. And also the short-term rentals are directly aiding in the homeless epidemic that we're dealing with. Like, there's a reason that we're continuing to see more and more tents pop up, more and more people are living inside of these dilapidated buildings. Like, it's unsafe for them, it's unsafe for us. And so I would want to see those two things, first of all, be handled. And then I think we can start working on everything else.
Thank you. We're going to stay with you for our second question. Thank you. That's the first round. Our second question is going to be from the New Orleans Health Department. Black men are 70 times more likely to be killed than the national average. What's your solution? We're going to stick with you, Ms. Wallace. What's your solution to the murder problem we have here in New Orleans?
So I think, first of all, we have to take a long, hard look at the city itself and how we've put Black men in this position in the first place. Like, we've ultimately created these familial inequalities through unjust incarceration rates versus rehabilitation and education. And it takes generations to recover from that once you've already been victim to it. Protecting Black men is ultimately all encompassing. It's a combination of addressing the wealth inequality. We have extremely lax gun laws. There's a war on drugs right now, which could be fixed through very specific legislation that we just haven't seen happen yet. Also, the housing inequality. If you have access to a safe place to go home to every day, then you're less likely to be in situations where you can be harmed in this way. And also subpar mental health care. It's like, we're not living in a city right now that puts that at a top priority. And the fact that we're having a situation where we have statistics like you're 70 times more likely to be killed in your home city. Even if you're not physically or directly affected by it, it puts a mental weight on you that you need help to be able to address. And once we actually can create this environment where Black men are not just getting by, we'll actually start to see them in situations where they can thrive because of what the city's doing for them versus them succeeding potentially in spite of what the city's offer them, which is not much right now.
Thank you, Ms. Wallace. We're going to go now to you. I never knew your first name was Sibil. Fox Richardson. Let's have the same question, which is, New Orleans men are 70 times more likely to be killed than the national average. We have a real murder problem here. What's your solution?
For me, I know, Jeff, I am, as the mother of 6 sons that I have raised here in the great city of New Orleans, and I would probably add in front of that 6 successful sons that I have raised here in the city of New Orleans. I do believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm the only candidate that is running for this seat who has raised a family here in New Orleans. And with that being said, I know that education, again, is the great equalizer. When I was incarcerated, I had never met a person that could not read or write until I was in prison. And when you look at the statistics of those who were in prison, the highest level of education on average is a 4th grade education of those that are incarcerated. When we educate, then we don't have to incarcerate. A person who has a formidable education has hope. And when you have hope, no matter how dark your situation is, you believe that you can make it through. You can see the light at the end of the tunnel. tunnel. And so you are less likely to put yourself in harm's way. You move in a way that shows that you value yourself more. And those are the types of things that help me raise the 6 sons that I have, 5 of which who have gone on to get a college education, 1 who is working at the U.S. Capitol as Director of Operations at 23, 1 who is in his residency to be an orthodontist, 1 is a sommelier, 2 have served as veterans. I know that with love and a proper education, our Black boys in New Orleans can make a good life for themselves. I thank you for your time, and I do believe that I shared earlier. I apologize, but I have a 5:30 cutoff as I had another event, but I could not miss the opportunity to be a part of this Justice and Beyond event.
Well, thank you, Ms. Richardson, for joining us today. Sorry you have to leave, but we're gonna just continue on. Mr. Kennedy, same question for you, and that is, what are we gonna do with this Black men being killed 70 times more than the national average here in New Orleans?
Definitely. Thank you for the question, Jeff. As a Black man growing up in New Orleans, I grew up in a time when New Orleans was extremely violent in the 1990s, where you had about 400 murders that happened in the city of New Orleans. And unfortunately, my family, I've had 2 of my siblings lost to gun violence, my younger brother and also my younger sister. And what I feel, I think your question is, what is the solution that we can help reduce the rate of how Black men are being murdered in this city?
That's correct.
One of the things that I feel like we have is that people are perpetuating crime, just really survival in a sense of survival. And so, as we know in the state of Louisiana, when we talk about expungement, Louisiana is the highest incarcerated capital in the United States, but also the incarceration capital of the world. So most guys who are coming on from prison or who even get arrested have a problem even trying to get themselves back into the economic environment and participation in the economy. And so I would look to get rid of expungement costs, reducing that down from $550 to something more reasonable, maybe $100, especially if folks have paid their debt to society, spending years in prison. The second thing I will focus on is bringing back trade schools, and to inspire young people, because everybody don't want to go to college. My mother had 9 children, and a few of us went to college, but I think inspiring young Black men to go to trade schools, to be able to pick up those skills, to becoming brick masons, to becoming roofers, to become electrician. All those are real well-paying jobs, and I think that can help also reduce the violence that Black men are seeing in the city of New Orleans. And finally, also bringing money for conflict resolution. New Orleans is just that mentality that we just pick up guns real quick in order to solve our conflict, with one another. So I would like to bring resources for conflict resolution, but also for mental health services. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Knox, same question for you. Your solution to this murder rate, this terrible murder rate we have in the city of New Orleans. And it's particularly as it relates to Black men is the question. What are we going to do of the fact that Black men are 70 times more likely to be killed than the national average in New Orleans?
Yeah, and thank you for that question. That number should alarm everyone on this call and throughout this city. 70 times, that's really unacceptable. As one of 2 Black men in this race, I think it's fair to say that we can't continue on this path. We have to do something drastically. We have to come up with common sense legislation. The question was, what is the solution? I don't think you're going to get anyone to preach our way out of this. I don't think you're going to get anyone to talk about their own family experience to get us out of this process, out of this crisis. This is a pandemic. In and of itself, when you're talking about 70 times the highest rate, that makes no sense. One of the things that I would want to put forth is legislation that focuses on schools, putting mental health in schools and using our diversion from suspension to use in place for mental health, not just for the kid, but for the family as well. We need to invest in mental health in this state of Louisiana. We have virtually zero mental health because during the general's administration, he wiped it clean. So we need to get back into the Congress, into the legislation, and be serious about how we're going to fund mental health in the state of Louisiana. One other thing I would do is to put forth legislation to get rid of some of the automatic weapons that's on the streets. As a former Marine, combat machine gunner, I happen to know a little bit something about fully automatic weapons. I think more than anyone on this panel, I speak with credibility when I'm talking about is common sense that we have a conversation about removing fully automatic weapons off our streets of New Orleans and in our state of Louisiana. It's going to have some issues. It's going to have some pushback from a Republican-controlled Congress. But like someone of myself who has that experience, I can speak truth to it with some level of credibility, unlike any of my other opponents. We also have to talk about doing a living wage. Living wage, $15 minimum an hour. I pay my employees at my coffee shop as a small Black-owned business, $13.25 an hour. That's more than almost any coffee shop in the city of New Orleans. If you give Black men a job, an honest wage pay for honest wage of day, you're going to see some changes in how violence affect everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry for going over time.
Ms. Clevenger, same question for you. Do you need me to repeat it? Just unmute yourself and there you go.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for the question. As a lifelong New Orleanian, growing up in the 6th and 7th Ward and Uptown, in the 80s and 90s, when drugs really came into the city, crack and other drugs, I saw many of the people I grew up with and their families devastated by gun violence, to the tune of 500 a year. And now I'm seeing the grandchildren, the children and grandchildren of those folks that I knew becoming victims of gun violence. So it's very, very close to me. And a lot of it is our systemic long-term problems in New Orleans of how we devalue people, whether it's through our economy, our education, and just every quality of life signifier. So we need to increase hope and improve health and opportunity and heal people. And we need to restore and increase funding for physical and mental health services, not only in the realm of the city, but in schools, and funding and expanding the presence of trained social workers in schools, but also for the parents. And we have a lot of parents that need the services to understand where their children are and what they're doing and how they can improve their children's lives. But again, I've been leading the call for gun safety for over a year now, because as a member of the Police Community Advisory Board under the consent decree, one of the things I hear from community all the time is where are the guns coming from? And just like when drugs were pushed into the city, we have to wonder how are the guns coming into the city? And we also know that from the police that many of the car break-ins are tied to harvesting for weapons. I have a young friend who was killed last week, 16 years old, by a gun, an illegal gun. So at the legislature, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clevenger. Stay right there, though, because we're going to come back to you on this third question. The question is, it's kind of long. Louisiana is a terrible place to be a woman. Violence against women, access to health care, the income gap, and access to education. We are second in the nation for women being killed by men and above average for rape. As a legislator, how do you plan on addressing these wrongs? Specifically, where do you stand on a woman's right to choose? Ms. Clevenger, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much. As a community leader and as someone the community trusts, I receive calls literally daily from women, some friends, some family and others who refer women to me to try to help them through situations where they're being abused or in danger of their lives and their children's lives. In the last 10 years, 200 laws have been passed in Louisiana legislature bipartisanly to protect women victims of sexual assault, domestic abuse, and human trafficking. Now, what we need to make sure of is that the state does not roll back these laws. Currently, only 10% of funding for shelter comes from state legislature. And what we need to do is support organizations like STAR and United Against Domestic Violence Coalition to support funding to request a ramp up for shelter for women and children coming out of abusive relationships. Also concerning is the recent federal Fifth Circuit Court ruling about taking guns away from domestic abusers who are under protective order. And the ruling says that violates their constitutional rights. While the state law is still in effect, we must do everything possible to not roll back this law.
Okay, thank you.
Is that time? I wasn't clear.
You have about 30 more seconds if you have more to
Okay,
say.
well, again, I am a woman and I stand up for women's rights every single day. And we must protect women and children and stop the violence, because violence in the home begets violence in the street.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Clevenger. Mr. Knox, I'm going to read this question again because it's long and I want to make sure everybody here hears it. Louisiana is a terrible place to be a woman. Violence against women, access to health care, income gap, and access to education. We are second in the nation for women being killed by men and above average for rape. As a legislator, how do you plan on addressing these wrongs? Specifically, where do you stand on a woman's right to choose? Mr. Knox.
Well, thank you for that question, and it is a very important question at that. I'll take the last first. I believe in a woman's right to choose. And just on a basic, simple response, I don't believe me as a man have a right to tell a woman what to do with her body. I just think that's the most ignorant thing that we as men can tell another woman what to do with her body. Just so on that principle alone, I think a woman can do whatever she chooses with her own body. To the other part of the question, and it's very personal to me, and I'll share with that why. As a 6-year-old, I saw my mom with a blackened eye. I stayed with my grandmother. My mom came to pick me up, and as she came to pick me up, my grandmother turned me away so I wouldn't see her blackened eye. I was 6 years old. The next time I saw my mother being abused was when my father took her by the neck. And as a 12-year-old, I had to jump between my mother and my stepfather with a knife to keep him from strangling my mother. So for me, this is really personal. It is really personal. And I have to ask my mother permission to share this with everyone. But one of the things I would do is to put forth legislation that will create a registry where individuals who are convicted of domestic violence, they have a registry so women can go on that registry to see and check the men that they're dating. It's a simple principle. It's a common sense tool for women to use to vet men that they are dating or they're about to marry. Secondly, I would look at how do we protect women on our college campuses. We know there's a significantly high number of rapes that go on our college campuses that go unreported. So I want to be able to provide funding to those schools that they can provide sexual assault centers so victims of rape and domestic abuse can go and get the counseling that they need. I would also put in that legislation to find these school colleges and universities that fail to report appropriately these types of violence. Lastly, I want to say that we should uplift our women. We should respect our women, and we should pay them for the work that they do equally to men. It makes no sense in my mind if a woman's performing the same work, the same duties, why she's not getting paid. In particular, women of color.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. Your time's up. Thank you for your answer. Mr. Kennedy, same question. You want me to read it again?
Yes, if you can, please.
Sure. Louisiana is a terrible place to be a woman. Violence against women, access to health care, income gap, and access to education. We're second in the nation for women killed by men and above the national average for rape. As a legislator, how do you plan on addressing these wrongs? Specifically, where do you stand on a woman's right to choose?
Thank you for the question. I stand with a woman's right to choose because I think, like you all heard, a woman, we came from a woman. And so I think that a woman should be able to decide. They make good decisions on their own. So I don't think as a man or any individual should be able to dictate how a woman chooses to use her body. In regards to violence against women, I guess as the elephant in the room, most folks know if you've been watching the news or read a newspaper, I did plead guilty in 2013 to domestic violence. And so it's very unfortunate, the situation that occurred between me and my ex-lover. She's forgiven me and I've also forgiven myself, but I also want to be able to find ways and working with women groups and domestic violence groups in order to craft legislation. I'm not a woman, so I don't know how a woman think. So I will have to work, more with women organizations in order to be able to craft legislation that can be helpful and protective for women and their rights. I also believe in providing resource for substance abuse. We know that most of domestic violence situations occur because of the substance abuse. And so being able to address, substance abuse by bringing more resources to mental health. I think also we talk about conflict resolutions in the streets with gun violence, but we also need conflict resolutions in our household. I was also a witness to my father beating my mother. And unfortunately, I think we have a lot of those experiences in Black households because of the situation that many folks are dealing with. Is it right? No, but we know that some of these domestic violence situations go unreported. And so I would like to really kind of bring that to the forefront and talking more so with women organization in order to craft legislation. Equal pay for equal work, I'm also in support of that. But as we know, in the state legislature, they fight back hard against that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. That's your time. Ms. Wallace, last one for you on this question. Do you need me to repeat it?
No, that's okay, actually. Thank you. So we actually can't even expect the war on women to be expressed when lawmakers have made it very clear that we don't deserve the right to choose what happens to our own body. So as a legislator, I would make sure that reproductive rights are protected across the board in all situations and circumstances where the person actually wants it. We need to have a united front so that we have the ability to hold these institutions accountable where a lot of this is happening. A lot of it's on college campuses. I've made it clear before in other groups that I've spoken to that college is supposed to be a safe space for young adults to learn and further build themselves up to enter society as a working person, as whatever they're going to do with their lives. And that's the last place that something like this should be happening. So they need to make sure that they're taking care of their students in whatever way possible. And also this type of violence happens so frequently because the perpetrators actually know that it's going to end up in an overcrowded filing cabinet. And so a lot of times the women aren't even reporting this because of that. And a lot of the blame is often placed on the woman because they don't do it. I mean, I personally think that we need to start building more safe spaces for women, and it needs to be government subsidized. My own mother right now, I will say a survivor of domestic violence, is working on building a safe space and potentially a place where she can offer resources to other women looking to escape these situations. And we already have a lot of these spaces available, but they are underfunded and overcrowded. And so that's something that I would want to focus on, and making sure that they have the resources they need so that we can all work together to fight these situations, whether it be emotionally, health-wise, or just legal solutions for them.
Thank you. All right, we're going to stick with you again, Ms. Wallace. Now, all of the candidates here for the audience are Democrats. And I only bring that up because we have a tax question. And our next question is, what is your stand on the legislature's effort to eliminate the income tax and replace it with an increased sales tax, which will put the burden on low-income residents? Ms. Wallace?
Okay, so for me, it's a bit of a two-parter because it's to this extent, this particular issue, as far as I know, hasn't been discussed in this way on the local level, because I know that presently in DC, there are several Republican congressmen working to eliminate the income tax, which is based on individual wealth and tax brackets, and they want to replace it with that increased sales tax, which puts the burden on working class families, on low income families. But what I know is happening right now in the state legislature is that we have a temporary sales increase that's set to expire in 2025 that's supposed to leave us with a $400 million deficit that we need to figure out how we're going to fill in the gap for that revenue. And I know there's a lot of different ways we could do it to make that increase so that we don't have to increase sales tax again. And it could actually come down to taxing the people that benefit the most from these property tax exemptions, these large corporations that are coming into the city but not investing in the city. And so if we can do that and not place the burden on low income, hardworking people in the city who actually live in the city, then I think that would take care of anything. But no, I would absolutely not support a sales increase because I know that would personally affect me. It would affect the entire community. It would affect all the people that work in hospitality and the culture bearers and the artists. And we don't need that because that's the reason that people are coming to the city. So we need to protect them and their way of living.
All right, so to be clear, I just want to make sure I understand. You want to keep the current income tax structure as it is and not eliminate it and don't replace it with sales tax. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
To clarify, yes, anything that involves putting the burden in whatever capacity, I'll say that because structures can change. Anything that puts the burden on low income families, I'm not for.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, Mr. Kennedy, same question for you. What's your stand on the legislature's effort to eliminate the income tax and replace it with an increased state sales tax? And that will put the burden on low-income residents.
Yeah, I would be opposed to such a measure because we know that's regressive tax policy, right? Most low-income and middle-income folks basically spend a lot of their resources. Wealthy individuals usually invest their resources. So I would be totally against an increase in the sales taxes on households in Louisiana. I do understand somewhat what some of the legislators probably thinking if they can probably increase more economic activity by reducing income taxes, but we know that's just not always the case. I know there's no income tax in Texas, there's no income tax in Florida, the state income tax, I should say. Right. So does it help with economic development? It does somewhat, as we can see, most of the companies that was located in New York in the Northeast, they're actually moving down and creating corporate headquarters in Florida, or either they create them in Texas. So, but once again, I would be totally opposed to increasing sales tax revenue, sales taxes, because it's a regressive policy on low income families and working families, and also middle income families. So I would definitely be opposed to any legislation that want to focus on increasing sales taxes on our people.
Okay, so again, to be clear, you want to keep the current income tax structure in place and do not replace it with an increased state sales tax. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Knox, same question for you.
Thank you. The question is very intriguing, and it seems to make sense when you first think about it just on the surface level. But there's no doubt that the most who would be negatively impacted would be low-income individuals. For me, just on a basic common sense level of equity, I can't see where a low-income person should share and pay the same amount as a millionaire or a billionaire. That just doesn't make sense in my mind. So therefore, I would not be in favor of replacing the income tax with an increased sales tax. Secondly, as a business owner, I don't see how that would help my business, particularly when there's an increase in tax. That means it's going to be an increase in goods and services to my business. That means I'm going to have to pass on that expense to my customers who are already suffering because they're not getting paid a living wage. They're not getting paid an amount where they can afford for affordable housing. So all of these variables will be impacted when you're talking about eliminating an income tax for a sales tax. So just on a basic principle of equity and fairness, I wouldn't be in favor of eliminating the income tax.
Thank you. And I don't have to ask my follow-up because you were clear in your final statement. Ms. Clevenger, same for you. You need to unmute yourself, Ms. Clevenger.
Apologize. No, I'm not in favor of replacing the current income tax structure with an increased sales tax on people, because as many of the other candidates have already said, it would place an undue burden on an already burdened people. As Knox said, increasing the cost of goods and services, but also because we're in an inflationary time, prices are already high on every staple that we consume. So, but, you know, it is an intriguing question, because the current income tax structure, we need to make sure that that is also fair. And we also see taxes on industry here. We give so many subsidies to so many industries to try to lure them to Louisiana. But if we improved our education, if we improved our people's opportunities, we would have a more attractive environment for industry to come, where we wouldn't have to persuade them by giving them our tax dollars. So I think it's a very a question that there's no debate. We cannot continue to tax our people at the sales tax level. So I would not support that.
Okay, thank you. All right, and we have our fifth and final question. We're going to stay with you, Ms. Clevenger. It's about homeowners insurance. And the question is, given the homeowners insurance crisis we are facing in Louisiana, what do you propose? And what do you think of the recent proposal to subsidize private insurance companies to get them to write homeowners policies in Louisiana?
Well, as a leading advocate for affordable homeownership, because homeownership at every level, particularly for working class people, seniors, and low income and generational homeowners in New Orleans, we have incredible erosion of homeowners in our sit after hit. So insurance, I served on a panel. This insurance
Wait,
crisis.
Ms. Clevenger, I don't know if anybody, I think you haven't, you're choppy a little bit. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, could you start over? I apologize for interrupting you.
Okay.
I just want everybody.
No, not a problem. Okay. So, did you hear any of it? Should I just start over?
Just start over, please.
Okay. We do have an insurance crisis in this state, but we also have it reflected in other states that endure repeated disasters. And as a leading advocate for affordable homeownership, which includes low income seniors and even now the middle class, we need to make sure that affordable homeownership is still existent in the city. So insurance becomes a big crisis. I served on a panel with John Bell Edwards, and is really such a big question. And we saw in the legislature this last week a Band-Aid approach and of subsidizing insurance companies to lure them here. But I think if we spent our dollars wisely on preparing our folks and hardening our homes and reducing risk for insurance companies, that they would see us as a more able to be insured. And we also need to collaborate with other states who are enduring the same crisis, like Florida and California, because of repeated disasters, that if we collaborate with other states and go to the federal level, we can look at changing the regulations surrounding the industry. We don't need our people to lose anymore, because every time we get a disaster, we get hit and we lose people, and we can't afford to lose any more people.
Thank you, Ms. Clevenger. Mr. Knox, same question. Let me repeat it. Given the homeowners insurance crisis we are facing in Louisiana, what do you propose? And what do you think of the recent proposal to subsidize private insurance companies to get them to write homeowner policies in Louisiana?
I think the current plan that's out there now to subsidize insurance companies, it is a Band-Aid, it is a short-term fix. We need to be talking about how do we comprehensively and holistically revamp the entire insurance industry in the state of Louisiana. The $45 million that's been allocated to lure companies into Louisiana to do business, in my opinion, I would propose that a significant portion of that $45 million to go shore up the Louisiana Citizen Insurance Corporation, which is the last resort insurer in the state of Louisiana. I think once you ensure that there is a last resort, such as Louisiana Citizens, that in itself will spur competition for other insurance companies to come in and be competitive. Not just any fly-by-night insurance company, but those that are reputable and those that have long standings in other states. We need to look at how we're going to attract those good quality insurance companies, not just the fly-by-nights. That's the problem that we have now. We allow so many companies to come here that haven't been in business that long, that have failed in other states, and allow them to do business here in Louisiana. It doesn't do anything in the marketplace to lower premiums. In fact, it increases premiums. So those are things that we have to look at from a holistic approach and from a comprehensive approach.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Knox. Mr. Kennedy, same question. Do you need me to repeat it?
Yeah, if you may.
Sure. Given the homeowners insurance crisis we are facing in Louisiana, what do you propose? And what do you think of the recent proposal to subsidize private insurance companies to get them to write homeowner policies in Louisiana?
Yeah, I guess I'll answer it in the reverse. I think it was basically really a bad idea. You're really putting a Band-Aid on a shark bite. And as we know in Louisiana and also in many other parts of the country, we have a natural disasters seem like they're just popping up on a regular basis. We never had tornadoes in New Orleans, and now we're having tornadoes. Not only have to deal with tornadoes, but hurricane and also flooding. And so I will take a multi-pronged approach. And so right now, the building code, I think, is going to change in July of this year to have housing and buildings be more resilient in being built. And so hopefully that can help with reducing some of our long-term insurance costs, just because we know the building code is getting more stringent in order to make sure that the buildings are really sustainable and resilient to natural disasters. The second portion is how can we do some sort of pool funding resource in order to be able to make sure that we providing insurance coverage to most of the citizens in our state. And as we know, we don't want to have insurance company cherry picking, because some insurance company, they're going to cherry pick based on a person's credit score, based on a person's net worth, in which we know that will greatly impact low and moderate income households, especially Black families, when we think about insurance. And so I would really want to focus on working with the insurance commissioner on ways that we can create some type of pool insurance funding mechanism to be able to make sure that we get insurance coverage to those who are most in need, and also making sure that there are not discriminatory practices on how insurance policies are being written for the people in our state.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Ms. Wallace, same question. Do you need me to repeat it?
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We presently have about 125,000 homeowners on citizens insurance. And so that's already about 10% more than market value of standard insurance that we should have right now. And then they're constantly doing increases month after month after month, and our residents, the homeowners, are having to eat that up. So spending $45 million is not ideally what I would have chosen or what I would have wanted to vote for in that situation. But putting this money towards that incentive program is potentially the only way to stop the residents from stopping these homeowners from drowning in this current structure that we do have. So it is a short-term fix, and the current legislation knows that. But I think it's the only thing we can do right now to dig ourselves out of this hole that we're in with, these companies going bankrupt, cherry picking, like I think Mr. Kennedy said, who they are choosing to insure. And ideally, best case scenario, this program will bring in more and hopefully quality companies who can handle New Orleans needs at a reasonable cost long term.
Thank you. Okay, so those are all of the questions that we have. Now we're going to have a little summary session. We're going to let each of you take about 3 minutes and tell us why we should vote for you. Why should the people who are listening here vote for you? And we will keep our order like we've been doing. Ms. Wallace, we'll stick with you and tell us about yourself and your candidacy and why you're the best candidate for House District 93.
Thank you. As a lot of people know, and I saw it in the newsletter that went out to your group, I am a stage and screen actor, but I've also been involved in nonprofits, particularly food banks, food scarcity, and disaster relief for nearly 25 years. Initially, I had no intentions of running for this vacant seat. And so it wasn't until members of my community that I've worked with recently doing this disaster relief, doing food distributions in the community. They reached out to me because they expressed the need for someone who represents the average person in the district, and they want that person to be their voice versus what we have now. And District 93 is often referred to as being this economic powerhouse of the entire state, but there's always very little reference to the actual people. And well over a third of the residents in some form are working in hospitality and the arts. They are the ones keeping this powerhouse running. And I've been extremely consistent on this platform throughout this campaign about how the first thing I would do is increase the minimum wage, because I know what it means to families to take the burden off of you, take the burden off the kids, and put money in people's hands. That way, if we do that minimum wage increase, which I will stand firm on, and no matter what, it'll finally show the residents the respect and dignity that they deserve. And I guarantee if we can do that, then we will start seeing actual progressive change in the city. Because no matter what anyone says about other needs that we have that we do need to address, if people are hungry, if they don't have a good place to stay, nothing's going to get done.
Thank you, Ms. Wallace. Mr. Kennedy, tell us about yourself, why you're the best candidate for House District 93.
Definitely. Once again, thank you, Justice and Beyond Coalition, for giving me the opportunity to tell you all why I'm the best candidate at this particular time and in this particular race. My name is Stephen Kennedy. I've been active in our community for many, many years, working with some of you all on this call tonight. I'm not going to talk about what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk to you all about what I have done. I've been working on the ground in the community, advocating on many, many different issues of importance, going to Baton Rouge on tough issues, even when it comes about advocating to take down racist monuments that were dedicated to white supremacists. I took that hard stance and went to Baton Rouge to speak in regards of having New Orleans be able to take down those monuments. I've also been advocating in Baton Rouge to have fair chance housing. So as we talk about those who are formerly incarcerated, one of the critical needs that they have is housing. And when you have, when you have barriers to housing, you basically kind of create recidivism. I'm trained as an urban planner. I've also been developing affordable housing in our city for low and moderate income individuals. I've also been employing minority contractors, women contractors, being able to help them grow their business, but also to being able to employ other families. I've also helped pass legislation with the New Orleans City Council, the Equitable Business Opportunity Program, which allows for small, minority, and women-owned businesses to have procurement opportunity with government. I'm also the Democratic standard bearer. I was endorsed by the Orleans Parish Democratic Executive Committee because they felt that I was the right choice at the right time for this seat. And so with all those things, I feel like I am the best qualified candidate to go to Baton Rouge, to hit the ground running, to be able to work with members of the Orleans delegation and other members to be able to get things done. I'm Stephen Kennedy, and I'm number 3 on the ballot, and I hope that you all consider voting for me. And early voting has started, but election day is February the 18th. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. Mr. Knox, your opportunity to tell the people why you are the best candidate for District 93. You got a couple of minutes.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Justice and Beyond, for this opportunity to share with you about myself and what I envision to bring to this district. I think first and foremost, there's many layers to me, which make me the best candidate for this seat. One, I'm more than just a business owner. I'm more than someone who just employ people. I've been on this path a long time. I didn't just start during this election cycle. I didn't just start when I have a book deal to promote. I didn't just start when I have a movie deal that's in the works. I'm not on this run to be a promotional track. I'm not on this run to make myself enriched. I'm very blessed in my business and what I do. I'm the only candidate in this race who has experience at all 3 levels of government. I worked in Baton Rouge as an intern for Representative Sharon Weston, who's now the mayor of Baton Rouge. I worked as an intern for U.S. Senator J. Bennett Johnston in Baton Rouge. I took that experience and I went on to Washington, D.C. to work for U.S. Senator John Breaux in his Washington, D.C. office as a legislative correspondent and an assistant to the legislative director.
1 minute.
I've been doing the work for many decades. I worked with New Orleans Police and Justice Foundation to do expungements. I didn't charge anyone. I was the one paying for the expungement. I didn't call myself an activist asking for someone to pay me. I did what I needed to do on behalf of those people who couldn't afford it. I also worked with opportunities for fathers and families because I recognize that fathers are important to the family unit. Without a strong father in the family, you're gonna have a breakdown of that unit. So I worked with programs in Central City at the then CJ Pete, now Harmony Oaks, to revitalize that entire area. And I did it without asking anyone to pay me. I was on the end giving money. So I'm not new to community service and I'm not new to engagement. What I am new to is the politics, because apparently there are other people in this race that think I'm the best candidate because they tanned up my signs and cut my head off. So that means I must be a threat and I must be the best qualified for this particular seat at this particular time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Knox. And finally, Ms. Clevenger. We saved the best for last. How you said last but not least. Ms. Clevenger, tell us why you are, in fact, the best candidate for District 93. You got to unmute yourself again. There you go.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And thank you, Justice and Beyond. I'm the best candidate because I'm actually from New Orleans and born and raised. I have deep roots in every part of District 93. Grew up in the French Quarter before tourism took over. The most diverse and accepting neighborhood in all of New Orleans. We were displaced and pushed to the 6th Ward, which was a favorite home. I witnessed the pulling up of the trees on Claiborne Avenue and every evolution and destruction of neighborhoods since that expressway went up. You know, we went uptown. My parents were visionary civil rights activists. I grew up in that foundation. I have a deep, deep knowledge of the history of this city and all the reasons and inequities and good and bad of how we got to where we are now. And I feel I'm the best candidate because I know the people of New Orleans and they trust me. And I've been a community leader for over 40 years. I don't get paid to do it. It's on our own time and dime. I'm a strong advocate for the people every day. I'm always at City Council advocating for issues that affect us, including how we spend our dollars and whether they go to the right place. District 93 does have significant assets. It's often been called the Uptown District, but in fact, we have 30 or precincts below Canal Street. And when you look at those precincts and you look at other precincts, you say, okay, where's the money going? But we send that money up to Baton Rouge, and we need to make sure who goes to Baton Rouge is going to advocate in the right way for the right reasons. And I care deeply about this city, and we must value every single person that lives here. And we must make sure that we care and we show we care, because right now people feel like we don't care. And our young people especially, we need to change that. And I'm the one to change that. Number 1 on the ballot, Morgan Clevenger. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Clevenger. We have a little time left, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. We'll take some questions from the audience. If you have a question, put it in the chat. I'll try to read it. Let's see if I can go through the chat.
Jeff, we did have a question by Ms. Lane. I want to say it was answered, but Lane, were your question answered by the insurance?
Yes, it was. I would have liked to have heard, we heard from several candidates about the importance of using that 45 million perhaps to shore up the community citizens, Louisiana citizens, fund. But I guess the only other question I might have is, does anyone want to speak to having a single payer system because for our insurance? I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Single payer. Anybody that's on single payer? Anybody want to expound upon the $45 million that we are giving to the insurance companies to get them to entice them to do business here in our state? Anybody have anything else to say about that?
I think I can say,
Go ahead, Mr. Knox.
as I mentioned in my response, we need a holistic, comprehensive approach to how we're going to address this insurance crisis. The single payer option is one that has been used in other states, and it's an intriguing concept. There are some equity issues in that concern me, but overall, what I know and what I'm informed about the single payer, that it does have its pros and its cons, but there's some concern as to, is there really equity? It's almost tantamount to when we talk about eliminating the income tax and increasing the sales tax when we're talking about single payer. I'm not totally averse to it. I'm just not as informed as I should be, but it's something I definitely wouldn't want to take off the table as we proceed to look at how we're going to get ourselves out of this crisis. And for me, we need a holistic and comprehensive approach. And the single payer option is one that I wouldn't necessarily take off the table.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. We do have another question. It's for any of you. The question is, how do you propose to deal with the conservative bloc you're going to face in the legislature in Baton Rouge? You know,
I'd like to address that.
Go, Ms. Clevenger.
Yes, well, we know what's coming. We know what we've been through, and we know that the New Orleans delegation always has big challenges in Baton Rouge. But we have to go back to the economics. If we can't appeal to their humanity, if we can't appeal to the compassion, then we have to appeal to the economics. And that means this: if you have a failing business, you can't suck any more money out of it, right? So if we have a city that's failing, then you're not going to produce as much money to go to Baton Rouge and the rest of the state. So we have to work at it from a situation where, how can we collaboratively address putting money back into the city so that we can produce more income for everyone, and it can go to the state, and the rest of the legislatures would be more happy to support New Orleans.
So if I'm hearing you right, you're saying because New Orleans produces, so you're going to convince them of the importance of New Orleans's economic impact on the state budget. Is that kind of it?
Yes. And I mean, we've seen that happen before, and we've also seen the resistance to that. But the bottom line is, if we don't work together on that issue, that one issue, then we're not going to get any further. And we just have to make sure that the dollars that are coming into our city and our state are being spent wisely and go where they need to go. But the dollars that are exiting our city also we need to make sure that there's a quid pro quo.
Got it. Okay, one more question from the audience.
If I can expound on that a little bit.
Sure, Mr. Kennedy, go.
As many years of, advocating in those walls in that Capitol, you can really see like a lot of these legislators are really controlled by lobbyists. And so if we're going to really have an open and honest, discussion, it's just that how can we work together collectively on those issues? Because when we think about a large organization like a lobby or like a oil and gas association, when we're thinking about a lot of those industries are really based in, kind of Baton Rouge. So they want to suck off, all the money out of New Orleans that it can go to Baton Rouge, and then those dollars can be reinvested into those industries that's outside of, Orleans Parish. And so that's one of the conversations that, we got to have, is that how can we work collectively with our colleagues who might be in Northern Louisiana or in Cajun Town and one of these other parts of, the state, who are being influenced by lobbyists to make decisions that they are really not informed on. And some legislators, be honestly, they don't even read the bills. They don't even read the legislation. They just have a guy maybe just tell them, hey, I think that this is good. And they don't even read it, and they just vote on a bill that might be hurtful to, Orleans Parish and things of that nature. So I think that that's how we can work together collectively to be able to have those hard conversations with the other.
So are you suggesting the Democratic representatives in some way influence the lobbyists to lobby more progressively? Is that kind of your idea?
Yes, because every municipality and even private industries hire lobbyists or advocates, or whatever you want to call them. Even the city of New Orleans have lobbyists. Every municipality have a lobbyist, either at the state capitol or in Washington, D.C. but it's being able to work collectively, you know, with those lobbyists to be able to have them to advocate and build those coalitions and those relationships, because most of the lobbyists, they have those relationships already. And so how can we have a collective working relationship with them to be able to help them, help us pass legislation that's beneficial to New Orleans?
Got it. Got it. All right, we got a couple more questions. Go ahead.
Mr. Jeff, we have Miss Belinda. Miss Belinda have her hand up before you go to the next question in the chat.
Okay, sure. Belinda Parker Brown. Go, Miss Belinda Parker Brown.
Well, good evening. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you all doing a great job here at Justice and Beyond, but most of all, most importantly, the candidates that have chosen to serve our great state of Louisiana. I just put my question in there. I want to know personally, how do you feel about white collar crime here in the state of Louisiana?
White collar crime is the question.
What specifically do you define as white collar crime? Do you mean financial crime or
corruption? You know, there has been, corruption, cover up, you know, stealing the money, you know, from the road homes all the way across.
Yes, ma'am.
Everything that have happened. You know, Louisiana is a unique state. And we have tolerated too much because we're known across the country as hospitality, being nice to people. You know, people come here and they suck the life out of us. You know, they take our money, they steal, corrupt contractors, you know, across the board. How do you feel about that? How do you feel we should be dealing with that?
Ma'am, yes, ma'am. And you're so right, because that's one of the reasons I'm running, because I see the effects of this on our people every day. The repeated loss, the repeated trauma. Post-Katrina, I served, you know, I got the only job I could, which was Louisiana Department of Homeland Security as a debris specialist, working boots on the ground to clean up the city for 3 years. And I'm telling you, the number of contractors involved in that operation, and you looked at where the money was going and how many people received a cut of that money, before it actually got to the people who are actually picking the stuff up and finding the dead bodies. And, you know, it was really something. But right now, I continue to see every time we have a traumatic loss, disaster recovery is now an industry. And our federal tax dollars, our state and local tax dollars often go to these programs where it tends to go to the people that already have resources. And we see, you know, first come, first served applications for relief money, where the people that have the bigger resources to get in on those applications first get the resources. And the people that need it the most never get to see it. And those inequities have to stop. And contracts particularly are where it all happens.
Thank you. I see a hand up from JL. Anybody else have something to say about that before we move on to Mr.
I would just add, I agree with everything that Morgan stated. And I think the white collar crime issue is much broader than what we probably think. I think the white collar crime starts in our political process. When we're running for office, I think the political machines that are normally backed by white collar individuals who are criminals, I think those individuals have a negative impact on the political process. They have a negative impact on our way of life. They have a negative impact in terms of how individuals go to work every day, particularly low-income people. But yet these individuals who are higher up, making all of these multi-million dollars a year, who have these multi-million dollar corporations, seem to get away scot-free with no prosecution. But yet we focus on these black men, these young black boys who are on the street corner pushing these little $10, $15 bags of weed, crack cocaine, and things of that nature, when you have the executive in an office that has crimes that's impact greater than anybody on that street corner. And as a legislator, we need to look closely at how we're letting these people get away with these type crimes. Just because white doesn't make it right. They need to be prosecuted at the same level and the same vigor as anybody else that's committing a crime.
Wow.
Okay, thank you. We're getting close to the end of our evening, but I want everybody to be heard as much as we can. JL, I saw your hand up, and then we have some more chat questions, a couple from Brooke. So JL, tell us who you are and ask us your question.
My name is JL Lazier. Can you hear me?
Yes, hear you fine.
So I had a question about.
What?
Hello?
I'm sorry, if you're not talking, please mute yourself. The only person we should hear from, besides the great Jeff Thomas, it's JL. I'm only kidding. I'm only kidding. Go,
In the
JL.
same line that Dr. Brown was talking about corruption. And in this case, I'm being more particular as to the corruption. I'm talking about the Democratic Party itself. So I want to know from these actual candidates who are going to be representing District 93 as state legislator, how will you get your policies? And of course, most people who campaign in the Democratic Party, Black people, always have great ideas. But when they get to legislate and when they go to the party, somehow it falls apart because the party doesn't go with what they're trying to propose. So how do you intend to get over that hurdle when your own party, the Democratic Party, that is the father of slavery since 1828, how are you going to be able to bring this to your colleagues in the state legislature and get them to vote on behalf of your proposal, considering, I want to make you to consider this, that HR 40 in Washington is being promoted by the Black Caucus, but not supported by the majority of the Democratic Party, the party of slavery? That's my question.
Okay, so let me, you had a lot of moving parts there. Let me try to summarize it. In addition to the Republican bloc that we already talked about, JL.
Okay, I can summarize myself. Thank you. So
Okay,
basically, you're running for District 93. You're representing majority Black people on the Democratic Party. How are you going to convince your colleagues in the State House to vote in favor to what you are proposing when they have an exhaustive record of always turning down whatever Black people propose? How do you intend to overcome that challenge?
Okay, I think we got it. Anybody want to take a stab?
Yeah, I'll
Mr.
take a stab at it as the Democratic standard bearer for Orleans Parish, at least. I can't sound the Democratic standard bearer for the I can't make up the minds of every single Democrat in the state of Louisiana. But what I can tell you is I will work collectively with members of the Louisiana Legislative Black Caucus and the Democratic Caucus. I think for the most part that Democrats are mostly good people in the state of Louisiana. And I think that they do vote collectively, but I think that we need to be more in a block and create and being stable with our block vote, because as we know, we got 109 representatives on the House side and then another 39 on the Senate side. And so you have to work together. But I think as we stay together as a coalition, a Democratic coalition and caucus, I think that we can get stuff done. Because as you see in the hoopla and the circus that's going on in Washington, D.C., we also kind of have some of those things that happen in Baton Rouge as well. And so I think sticking together as a coalition and as a bloc, we can be able to get legislation passed that can be impactful for those who are Democrats and those who are Republicans, just a citizen and constituency in the state of Louisiana. And so the simple answer is, in politics, you can't do anything alone. You have to work with people. And so I think working with people and building coalition is the best way to get results at the end of the day.
Why hasn't it succeeded? Why has that not succeeded? That's been happening for 50 years of Black Caucus. Why has it not succeeded?
You said why hasn't it hasn't succeeded? You know,
the past 50 years the Black Caucus has been in your state and throughout the country. Why has that not succeeded? Why don't you guys my recommendation? Leverage your votes. Vote against your own party to get what you want.
Okay, so we had a recommendation from JL. I see iPhone. Tell us who you are and ask your question. And then we have a couple more questions that I have to get to in the chat. iPhone.
Thank you. This is Cheryl Austin. I'm a Tremere resident and a homeowner. And my question is, what can you actually do to reverse how homes are being assessed in Tremere? And I ask that question because of the large influx of short-term rentals, which by my definition the community is being gentrified by taxation now. My taxes have tripled over the last year. And I don't think it's fair that historic residents of Treme is now responsible for paying higher taxes in a commercial community that was once a residential community. And can I also add that the short-term rentals are not actually living in 3 and 4 properties that they own in Treme. And by not doing so, they're diluting the voting base in this community. Because if you can't, if you can only live in a unit where you have short-term rentals or a commercial property, the other 2 are vacant most of the time, or visitors are there that will not help you all get elected. And if I could ask one more question, how many of you all own short-term rentals? Thank you.
Okay, so
I'd like to-
I didn't get the last part of the question.
how many do you own a short-term rental? Do any of the candidates own short-term rentals?
I'd like to
Well,
address
I
Ms.
can take
Austin's
that.
question.
Okay.
Okay.
Ms., go ahead. You want to answer that short-term rental question, Mr.
I want to
Knox?
answer the whole thing. Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Clevenger, you first, and then Mr. Knox, and then anybody else who wants to comment. We're gonna limit this to 1 minute because we're running late. We have a bunch of other questions, so as quickly as you can, please.
Yes, this is a very important questions that Ms. Austin is asking, because we have seen in 2016 when the city council literally opened the floodgates to investor STRs in residential neighborhoods, it caused a hollowing out of neighborhoods and also simultaneously an increase in property tax assessments, because these folks were willing to pay high prices for properties. And we know the assessor's mass appraisal method means the person who's been living in the house 70 years is getting the same assessment as the person who just bought the house for $500,000. We pushed very hard for the change to that law because we did advocate that when you lose 10% of voters, permanent residents, everything's based on the census and federal dollars, education, Medicaid, everything is based on the census. So when you lose permanent residents, you lose funding. When you lose voters, you lose your voice. So yes, we need to rein this in. And one of the biggest problems we've had with this is enforcement, not just of illegal ones, but the legal ones as well. And so, you know, it has to change. It has to change. We've changed the law 3 times since this began. Now, I own a bed and breakfast, which is different. I'm an owner-occupied, city-licensed bed and breakfast. It is not a short-term rental. It's under different laws and different rules. And we have much higher standards to meet with the city. But we have to rein it in.
Thank you. Mr. Knox?
Thank you. And I happen to know a little bit about this area of Treme. I've been in it for 20 years. And in those 20 years, I've seen my neighborhood drastically change from what it was when I first moved into what it is now. Treme is virtually almost gentrified, totally. It's the perfect example of what gentrification looked like in a historic Black neighborhood. Treme is the oldest African-American neighborhood in the US. And what has contributed to that? There's no question in anybody's mind who has lived in Treme for any amount of time that it has been STRs. One of the things that I'm concerned about is that there's some fairness and equity in how homes in Treme are being taxed. What I can do as a state legislature is look at the number of STRs and look at how can we make them operate more like a business. If you want to be a business person, then act like a business person. That means you need to be taxed like a business if you're going to get in the business of being an STR owner. Secondly, as a commissioner for 6 years on the HDLC, the Historic District Landmarking Commission, I'm concerned about the proliferation of STRs in our historic districts. Primarily, that's where the majority of them are located. There's a high interest in STRs being located in historic districts. One, because of the historic architecture that they all have and the housing stock that they have. 2, because of their proximities near downtown and other prominent areas. Our historic district need to be protected. I wouldn't be opposed to having a total ban in all historic districts in the city of New Orleans. But we need to look at how we get some equity, because STRs have become, in my opinion, a form of social engineering, meaning that there's a social hand behind the whole movement of this STR that's pushing people out, particularly in Treme, where you have culture barriers that come no longer afford to live and pay rent in the neighborhood that they contributed to and in the neighborhood that they made prominent worldwide. So I'm very concerned about that. I'm very upset with the fact that oftentimes people overlook neighborhoods like Treme and just brush them off as the old little black neighborhood that doesn't exist anymore. But yet Treme is the cultural bearer of the city of New Orleans, and it needs to be respected.
That's your time.
And,
Mr. Kennedy.
Yeah, my simple answer is no, I do not own any short-term rental, never have and never will. But for me, because I am an affordable housing developer, so I develop housing for low-income people, seniors, and people who own Section 8 vouchers. Because as someone who was born in public housing, I feel that just because you're a low income doesn't mean that you don't deserve to live in a quality, affordable housing in a safe community. So I'm definitely don't own any short-term rentals. And I definitely understand, because I'm not from the 6th ward, I'm from the 7th ward, but I hung in the 6th ward for many, many years, also as a born and raised resident in the city of New Orleans. And so I got family who've been living in the 6th ward for many, many years, and in the Treme. And so I definitely see the gentrification that's happening. I walked through that neighborhood canvassing. I was walking through it the other day, and you see just the rapid investment and the rapid investments and just the boundaries of Treme. The original boundaries has been expanded. So you don't know if you're in the old Treme or the new Treme. And so but you also rapidly see that, this gentrification that's happening in a lot of our neighborhoods, and that's out of town resources and out of town investors who are coming and buying up our properties in our community and pushing our people out. So I agree with Ms. Austin. Yes, we've been seeing dramatic changes in our neighborhoods.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question from the chat. It's about increasing police dollars and police presence in the city. How do you feel about spending more money on police and having more police on patrol in the city? Anybody want to?
I'd like to answer that.
Go, Ms. Clevenger.
Yes, sir. Well, we know historically we are down, the force is down quite a number of officers. We also have a problem with retention, and officers are leaving every day. And a lot of that has to do with not what they're being paid, but the quality of life that they're seeking somewhere else. And we know the morale for a lot of officers that come out of New Orleans is very low because they don't see opportunity to advance. But on the other hand, we have been throwing money at the police for forever. And in 2022, I think it was approximately $20 million of the NOPD budget was left on the table, unspent. And this council budget that just passed at the end of 2022 for 2023 threw another multi-million dollars at the police force. And yet every single elected official that ran in 2021 pledged to treat crime holistically, as I call it, a public health crisis, and invest in our youth and activities supporting outreach services, mental health, and other needs that our community has to reduce crime. We cannot police our way and arrest our way out of this issue. And throwing more money at the police does not help.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Knox. I see you, Mr. Knox.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. As someone who worked for the New Orleans Police and Justice Foundation, I can tell you unequivocally that police are not paid enough for the work that they do. There's no question when you have individuals who are working in the city of New Orleans in this climate of crime and violence, that they're paid what they're paid and morale is supposed to stay high. So I take issue with the fact that we shouldn't pay our police officers anymore, because that's just totally is not the case, that when you're putting your life on the line every day, you should not be adequately paid. So I push back on that just a little bit. Also, I think when we're looking at retention, we need to look beyond how we traditionally recruit police officers. I'm a Marine. When I got recruited, I had a recruiter to come to high school. We need to start looking at recruiting high school students to become in law enforcement to increase our police pool that we have. We have a shortage of about 150 so police officers. We can't sustain that at a level any longer. We need to look at new and innovative ways on how we recruit police, but at the same time, we need to be able to leverage our police that we have. We only need police to protect and serve in terms of violence. Where there's non-violent crimes, we need to send social workers out, mental health providers to take care of those issues. Our police are not trained and equipped to handle with someone who has a mental or addiction problem. That's not their job. That's not in their job description. We keep forcing them to do that. And that's not right, and that's not fair for the police officer. It's too much expectation on one individual who doesn't have the training, first and foremost. Most of them don't have college degrees, secondly, to go out and perform the type of duties that we expect them to do and don't want to give them adequate pay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Knox. We seem to have lost Mr. Kennedy. We only have 2 candidates left, Ms. Clevenger and Mr. Knox.
Can I make a clarification on that last question? I want to clarify that I wasn't saying we need to not pay the police more. What I was saying is we see money and budgeted money being put into the NOPD for extraneous things like more vehicles, more equipment, bulletproof vests. But there's so much of this, we don't have enough officers to actually drive those cars or wear those vests, or have more machine guns and tanks and helicopters. So that money that's being spent on equipment and vehicles is not actually helping us. And it needs to go back into the other side of it. We do need to pay our police more, but we need to be careful where we're just throwing money to be throwing money.
Okay.
Could I suggest that you look at the article I put a link to an article in the chat from a woman named Lee, who sorry, is that what I can't even remember now. Anyway, she's from Pennsylvania. She's a new term representative, and she's very, very smart. And she did a wonderful thing on NPR today. And she's really worth looking at. She has a lot of ideas about how to deal with crime, and they're not your usual things. So just putting out there.
Thank you for that, Brooke. Mr. Jeff, our time is first spent. Let's stop it at the next 2. One, Miss Kathy. She's in the chat. She asking you please ask her question. Also, Mr. Sweet, he's concerned about the children, about the students, about the youth. After those 2 questions, we're gonna have to close up Mr. Jeff.
Okay, sounds good. I'm looking for those questions. I saw one which said, I read it, if I remember, it says, what are you gonna do to support children in creating youth centers, I think, or something? I'm looking for it now. If Raymond is there and can ask his question, unmute yourself, Raymond, and ask.
I don't have a question. I'm just talking trash because this is some of the statements are disturbing, but I don't have a question.
Okay.
Well,
So what was the other?
Miss Kathy.
Yes, hi. It's actually another woman's question. What are each of you going to do about the horrific pollution along the river parishes? How can you stop? It's not just that. I guess there was another question in there talking about Louisiana in particular, and New Orleans by default's addiction to the fossil fuel industry. Are either of you remaining candidates willing to stand up against the industry that is destroying us, even though it is supplying us with a lot of money?
I'm happy to talk about that.
Go.
Yes. So, I've worked in the past with Together New Orleans and Together Louisiana and on these issues, and it's horrific. And we also know that it's not the same thing, but Gordon Plaza and the pollution of that land that caused so many people to have cancer and generational ills. The chemical industry controls Louisiana in a lot of ways, but we also subsidize these industries and we try to attract them. And I think it's very, very important that we find other ways to diversify our economy, not just in Louisiana, but in New Orleans, because we know a tourism-based economy tends to be a low-wage economy and doesn't offer room for advancement. But back to what your original question, Sunrise, Louisiana. I mean, I've talked to so many people that live along that corridor, and their fight is an incredible fight. And they are getting heard. And so, yes, I would stand up with them. But the lobbyists and the industries are very powerful. And the second part of your question, I'm sorry, you have to remind me. about fossil fuels.
Fossil fuels, yeah. Can you
Yes.
break our reliance on fossil
We've
fuels?
seen some advances towards that solar and wind energy, but we also see reversals of that. The sunset limits on tax credits. And one of them, a small thing, but a big thing, I don't evacuate anymore. I stay. And I try to help the people that stay after these hurricanes. So when we're sitting in the dark, afraid and with nothing, one thing that we see a lot of is this dependence on gas generators to get us through these disasters. And we have to stop that. So at even the most basic level, we need to create community recovery places and individual. We did that for a while. We were able to get mini solar kits that would power a phone and a light just to get people through a couple of days. But that lighthouse, community lighthouse opened, but we also need to focus on bringing more solar power recovery centers to our local playgrounds and parks, because that's what we did. We cleaned out our park the day after the hurricane and set up food and water and resources for 3 weeks and fed people. So the power was out for 3 weeks. So the more energy fails us, the more we have to come up with different solutions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Knox?
Thank you. And I couldn't agree more with everything Morgan just stated. I'm proud of the fact that I attend the church, First Grace Methodist Church, where Together New Orleans and Together Louisiana was actually birthed out of. And I agree with everything that they stand for and all the accomplishments that they have made thus far to the question that was asked. My basic and personal opinion about it is we have to do more to wean ourselves away from fossil fuel. We need to invest more in solar and wind, and we can do it right off the coast. We could do it in the Gulf. Florida is in the process of being a great model to follow. Other places are making incremental changes in terms of how they're weaning themselves away from eroding the coast. I think what the Biden administration has done to address some of our issues in terms of these orphan wells, these wells that big oil has left abandoned and left in our community and destroying the health and well-being of our residents. We now have a certain amount of level of funding where we can go and cap those wells, but we need to do more from the state level in terms of how we're going to rein big business in who leave those wells and leave them there for individuals, neighbors and residents to deal with, and then depend on federal government to do their part to come in and clean it up. We can't allow that to happen anymore in the state of Louisiana. We have to be bold enough to speak truth to power to the big oil industry. We have to be pragmatic in how we get them to level up and pay their fair share in terms of taxes. Those tax dollars can be recirculated back into our communities, into our schools. Those tax dollars can go towards building small businesses. We let so much subsidy go away to big oil that is breaking our state, and that's not fair.
Well, I just want to take a little liberal privilege here and thank you guys for allowing me to be here and facilitate and moderate. And I too want to thank you two candidates who are left and all of the candidates who participated today. It is an honor to be with you guys. Anybody who offers themselves up for public service is a hero in my mind. It's hard work and you get no rewards, but you get to help and serve the people. And so I applaud you and applaud your work. And thank you to Justice and Beyond for letting me be here. Pastor Manning and all of my friends on here. If I start naming names, I'll be in trouble because I see almost everybody I know in here. And I want to thank you guys for letting me be with you tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Jeff.
Thank
we
you.
Really appreciate you. We really appreciate you come and be our moderator for the night. You did an awesome job like we knew you was going to do. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
We thank you very much. We also thank all the candidates that came and voiced their opinion and voiced and told us what they're all about, what they plan on doing to better District 93. We really appreciate you showing up, and we appreciate you for the ones who stand because the other one, they did have other obligations. We really appreciate you. We also appreciate our guests, our supporters who come every week, every Monday to get the word out, to hear for yourself, to know about what's going on in New Orleans. If you have anything going on in your neck of the woods, in your backyard, in your neighborhood, in your community, please contact Just Beyond and we will investigate it. We will hear about it from you and get more about what's going on in your neighborhood. We thank you again. Now we want to ask anyone and everyone, will be silent for a moment, just for 3 seconds, and to give a thought to the ones who lost their lives in violence. Let's give a second, and then we will end with a prayer. Gracious Father in heaven, we do thank you, Lord God, for this blessed opportunity. You bless us to come together for a forum of the candidates of District 93. We thank you for the candidates who came, Lord God. We thank you for the ones who came to this forum, for they can hear, listen, and they can ask their question and make comments. We ask, Lord God, while we leave this place, that you please take care of us. Please protect us, Lord God. Protect our family and our friends, Lord God. Let us be a vessel used by you to be productive in our neighborhood, in our city, Lord God. Help us to be more kind to one another, more respectful to one another. We be careful to give you all the glory, give you all the praise. In Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen. Amen, everybody. Have a good night.
Good
See you
night.
next Monday at 5 o'clock.
Amen. Good night.